So, hi everyone. Today's theme is childless person of colour. And just before I carry on, I want to say that Bindi did a webinar just before this in the morning, and it was absolutely brilliant. And it's called Writing Our Stories of Colour, which Steph will upload to YouTube and the World Childless Week website. So go and check it out because it was fantastic. So today I'm joined by Bindi Shah and I'm joined by Jay Palmer, who are married, I think. Yes,
Yeah.
husband and wife. Just you don't like to assume here. So husband and wife. And today's topic is culture, race, and tradition, and how do these layers add extra burden to being childless not by choice? So just before that, I just want to say a little piece about this because sometimes there can be stereotypes around, South Asian culture. So each country has its own unique heritage, which can include different languages, religions, customs, and societal norms. And because of this, each childless person's experience will be very different. And so sometimes I've met South Asian people who've felt no stigma at all. And then there's others that I've met who have had, really faced huge challenges within their families and their communities. So I just wanted to start out by saying that. And we'll do some short introductions. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Aisha Balisaria. Some of you might know me from Mind Body Revival Coach on Instagram. And my journey to childlessness started around coming up to 11 years ago now, when I couldn't conceive. But before that, I'd been complaining of pain and bleeding all throughout my teens into my 20s, and my pain was dismissed by doctors. And it's only when I couldn't fall pregnant that the doctors actually decided to believe me, because before they said the pain was all in my head. And my cousin told me to self-refer to a hospital that specialised in fertility. And they did a diagnostic laparoscopy, and I was diagnosed with stage 4 endometriosis. And then the next 10 years looked like back-to-back IVFs. I did over 11. I had 4 miscarriages. And then eventually in 2019, after my last miscarriage, I decided I was going to leave the process without a baby. And that's my story in a nutshell. I mean, it's a lot longer than that, but I'm, making it very short for this webinar. So that's me in a nutshell. So I'll pass it over to Bindi to do her short introduction.
Hi everyone. So I'm Bindi Shah, and I'm a meditation teacher and a writer. So I do meditation classes for the Childless Not by Choice community. And my path really to childlessness is quite layered. So it did start earlier on with the non-committal of relationships. And all that entails about, not having a partner to have a family with. When I met Jay, we were kind of early 30s, I think 32, 33. So already on that path to being, a little bit perhaps late, but not knowing that at the time as well. Very naive, I feel. And then my adenomyosis started to really kick in. So I was diagnosed in 2013. And after that, I'm sure a lot of you know the pain, the constant pain, the bleeding, not having real cycles or proper cycles, I should say, which resulted then in hysterectomy. And also along the way, once, it wasn't happening for us because of the adenomyosis, Jay and I did try to adopt, went through the adoption process, which didn't progress. So, yeah, childless not by choice now, and very much definitely on the other side of my grief, so the heavy grief, but also living a childless life with all of its challenges and differences that come up, but also finding some joy in all of that too.
Thanks for that, Bindi. And Jay?
Hi everyone, I'm Jay. I am Bindi's husband, as she's just said, and I think she's summed up basically our childless journey. So I will leave it to that as to my childlessness and our childlessness. But I'm a professional musician. I have been for a good number of years, and I teach music and I perform music and I do YouTube, build guitars and amps and all sorts of fun stuff like that. And it's extremely creative. It's extremely fulfilling, and it has helped me through the childless journey because music's been an aspect of my life which has always been there for me, and it's seen me through some pretty dark times, and it has helped me. And also um, uh, by b- us being married, it's helped Bindi because it's helped me to be strong for her through childlessness, and help her through the journey as well.
Okay, that's really interesting. And I think actually going back to what you said, Bindi, I'm the same. So I've come through my grief. So I feel like I'm on the other side. And you know, there's certain things that I will never be over, and I think that's fine. But there's a lot of things now that don't trigger me that would have triggered me probably well, definitely at the start of my journey. And I think you're right, Jay. There's certain things that I have now that also help me. So one is my faith. Like you said, yours is your music. And through that, there's, you know, that really keeps me strong, you know, even in times where at some point I might feel triggered. So let's talk about the topic. So today's topic is about culture, race, and tradition. So how do you feel culture, race, or tradition has added these extra layers to childlessness? Who wants to start?
I'll let Jay start.
Thanks.
Put you on the spot.
She put me on the spot. That's okay. I don't mind. Um, it's a really great question. I've had some time to think about this as well. How does it add extra layers? I think in Indian families there is this whole concept of expanding the tribe, and there's this expectation to carry on the family name, and it's a big part of the legacy which is left behind, or that's what I feel anyway. That's been my experience in life. So children is a natural part of that expansion, and also the carrying on and the legacy. Us not being us not having children, that does add a pressure, and for a time I guess it did, but it also because I've led an alternative lifestyle for quite a long time, it hasn't impacted in an extremely major way. But there certainly is that expectation, and we see it when we meet other people, other family members, and see how their lives actually expand. There's this a regular kind of like timeline where, you know, they get married, they have children. And it's just one of the expectations which parents have, grandparents have, uncles and aunts have, and people ask, you know, and it seems to be part of it. So I think it might be amplified in Indian families.
Yeah. Bindi?
Yeah, I definitely think that yeah, I guess tradition really adds that extra layer. So, you know, what what you see with the extended family, what you see within the culture as well. So it is about that having children. And I think mine also started with getting married. So I don't know if that's the same with you, Aisha, but I know for me it was all about get married, and then after getting married, it's then having the child. So it's actually no, it's having yeah, getting educated, perhaps having a degree, then having a good job, then having, you know, then getting like a good husband, then having the family. So it's that kind of like traditional, I guess it's yeah, the traditional the norm, you know, how people want to say, well, this is, you know, this is a good family, look at them, and they have those, you know, yeah, that way. So definitely that's added a layer. I also feel the racial aspect for me has, and it might be because of the health diagnosis and the adenomyosis. So I was in like a health system and things like that, which did bring up the yeah, the unconscious bias, but also the inequality just really brought that up within that. So maybe it depends on the childless journey and what happens as well on the journey. So as well as the tradition.
Mm. And how did you feel when you got the diagnosis? Were you able to share it with your family?
I think they knew something was going on because of the heavy, very, very heavy bleeding and pain.
Mm.
Yeah, I did share it, but nobody really knew what it was. And I think even at that time, even the doctors, I mean, hopefully now, kind of 11 years on, there's a little bit more about it, probably not that much. But even the doctors, it was really difficult to get really clear answers. And you know what? Not once was I told that it would affect fertility, which I think was really bad. Like it was just like, oh yeah, it's another thing. Oh, it's fine. You know, you'll be fine. You'll still be able to get pregnant. You'll be fine. So I think if that had been a point earlier on, then yeah, maybe. And maybe there might have been more conversations. Family was really difficult. Because when we got married, kind of really soon after that, it was like, when are you going to give us good news? And that
Yeah.
I think really it used to trigger me like no end. Um, oh my goodness. So it was all that, that little kind of gentle, well, they think it's a gentle pressure, but really it was a lot. So it's not kind of outwardly saying it, but it's that good news aspect. I don't know if anyone else can relate, but yeah, so that kind of thing. So that yeah, I don't think that I ever really spoke about it openly though, because I think it was just a bit it was between us. I didn't really speak about it.
I mean, I was quite similar because I was diagnosed with endometriosis quite late. So it was 15 years after I had the symptoms I was diagnosed. And also, talking about adenomyosis, a few years ago, I was also diagnosed with adenomyosis.
Oh.
So yeah, I had like the double whammy. And when I first found out about these health complications, I shared it with my immediate family, so my in-laws, obviously my husband, but I didn't share it with anyone wider because I really didn't know anyone that was going through fertility struggles because nobody spoke about it.
Mm.
And I think tradition and culture aspect for me, especially in the good, my family Gujarati, my dad's family, but we're Muslim Gujarati. And in it, it's like family is at the center of everything. And by family, they mean children. Family doesn't just mean, it means children. And that is something that's very focused on in our community. And the bigger issue I had was not with my immediate family, my in-laws, it was the wider community. Because when my dad came over here in the 60s, they all kind of ended up in the same area. So every wedding we go to, we see the same people. When it's a funeral, we see the same people. And these same people are the ones that have had a child. And then the next time we see them at the wedding, they're pregnant again. And then the third wedding you go to, they're on their third child. And it's this constant, oh, you were married 2 years before me. When's it coming? Or they'll pat your belly. It's all really inappropriate.
Gosh.
And you want to laugh it off. And at the time, it was really difficult because no one spoke about this stuff. And there weren't the fertility or childless not by choice Instagram and Facebook accounts that you could use for support back then, like we can now. And what I found particularly hard was like the elders, because there's this big thing of, being respectful to elders, but a lot of the time it was them asking the most inappropriate questions because they know we can't answer them back or say something because, it looks bad on us, it looks bad on our family. So these sort of things I found quite difficult.
Also, there's the understanding aspect for the older people. I find sometimes trying to explain that there's a medical history which is stopping conception or something like that. It's actually quite difficult,
Yeah.
especially considering our grandparents. English wasn't their first language. It became our first language by, being born here and things. So it becomes quite difficult to broach those subjects, even with my folks, with my parents. I don't think we've ever really sat down with them and gone through what happened, exactly what happened. Partly that's due to me being quite a private person, so I don't necessarily share a lot of personal details with my parents or my family, or it's more my nearest and dearest, and obviously Bindi and I are very close. We live together, obviously, and work together in the same house. We're around each other pretty much 24/7. So we got to talk out all of this stuff between us, and I think that probably helped us to actually deal with a lot of it. So I didn't find myself reaching for um, an extended family to actually explain it to, but I can imagine that it would be pretty difficult to explain it to my grandmother or my grandfather when they were here, that this is what was going on. I think they would have understood, and they would have been pretty, would probably have been sympathetic to it. But yeah, that aspect of respect is certainly there, and that whole expectation. I guess, like I said, I've led an alternative lifestyle, so I've actually lived outside of the Indian community, so I haven't had to experience a great deal of this. I go to weddings once in a while when a close cousin gets married or something, so we don't have to experience it, let's say, on a 6 monthly basis when there's the next wedding or something like that.
Yeah, and I think that can be hard, but because you're always in the thick of it, aren't you? And like I said, where my dad and his family ended up, there's a massive community there. So how
Right.
do you feel? Do you feel like religion has added extra layers to your childless not by choice journey?
It's an interesting question. I think Bindi and I are both spiritual rather than religious.
Yeah.
So religion per se hasn't, because I haven't really followed the Hindu religion tradition for a long time. Can it? Does it have the ability to? Most certainly, because there are the rules and the aspects of it which kind of which veer off into people's lives and stuff. And I can imagine that if I was very, very tightly integrated into the society, what would have happened was religion would have played a part in, oh, let's go and see this religious guru to see if they can do something, or oh, let's go to this person, they'll be able to give you something so that you can conceive and stuff. And I guess in one way it gives people belief, it gives them a positive outlook which they can follow. For me, it was, I remember it happening when I was younger, from just different things in life, getting married, finding a partner and stuff, etc., etc. So, oh, we'll go and see this person. They said you'll find somebody really, really lovely and blah 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 in the next like 3 weeks or whatever. So that actually put me off that whole thing, because it just didn't really work for me. But I can imagine that if we were really tightly integrated into like Indian society, then my parents would certainly have broached it at some point, to my dread, to be honest.
No, I understand.
And
Bindi?
I also wonder, because it's so Jay's, so my family are not very religious. And also so when I was in school, they didn't really say what religion I was. Like I went to a Church of England school, and then it was kind of just assumed that I was Hindu, but actually the family religion is Jain. And and I only found out when I was a teenager. So when I went to visit my grandmother in Kenya. So my parents were born in Kenya and came over. And for me, I think it's not necessarily the religion, but more the culture around, so the community. So not necessarily like, oh, they're Jain or practicing Jain or anything like that, but it's more kind of like, oh, the community. And I don't know, some people in the community are more religious than others anyway. But it just kind of binds everything together in a way. So it's like, they've got this community behind them, and that binds people together. So Perhaps that, but also I do wonder because Jay's family or parents were definitely more traditional. I
Mm.
wonder if that then gave that little bit of barrier to, oh, I don't want to open up too much because yes, they would definitely have said things like what Jay just said.
Yeah.
And oh my goodness, like even now when I think about it, that would not have been a good thing. So yeah, I just wonder around that. There was a few things, wasn't there, around our wedding and things like that, around the more religious. So we didn't have a religious ceremony,
Mhm.
but there was that kind of thing around, oh, are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? Da, da, da. So there would have, I think, been a few things around children as well, for sure, for sure.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective because for me, in terms of religion, a lot of the issues I've faced are to do with my opinion, misinterpreted kind of religious beliefs. So I think a lot of the time, the older generation, not so much us, because I think we're a lot more um practical about things and we understand things in a different context. But I think the older generation, a lot of the time, it's very much about, you know, if you're not having a baby, it's like you're a big fat sinner. That really, really irks me. Or, you know, you've done something terrible, so that's why you don't have a child.
Yeah.
When we know that there's shitty people out there who have children, so that obviously isn't the case. Um, and then, you know, so I think them sort of beliefs from the elders. I mean,
Yes.
like pray harder, you're just not praying hard enough, you need to pray more.
Mm,
I think all of that is quite, you know, like toxic,
mhm.
you know, part of religion. And I kind of struggled with that because a lot of people were saying to me, oh no, pray this, pray that, you know, repent more, you know, and it's like we pray 5 times a day anyway. That's what we do as Muslims. So, you know, how many more prayers do you want me to do?
Yeah.
It's that kind of thing. And it's also like that misplaced guilt because then you start to believe that you're a horrible person and that, you know, it hasn't happened for you because you did something so bad.
Yeah. Or you did something really bad in a past life. Like, what did you do? Like, that's
Yeah,
kind of karma and just, yeah, that kind of fated part of life. Oh, well, you were never meant to have children, or yeah,
yeah.
that's just your path in life. Yeah.
So like these sort of things. And I think, you know, what we need to establish, especially now, I always say, you know, infertility is a medical condition. It's nothing we've done or haven't done that, you know, that hasn't allowed us to have a child. It's just like any other medical condition. Like if you want to, you try for treatment and it's not a guarantee. It's like any other
Yeah.
you know, illness you have. If there's a not a cure, but you know, medication, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So I
Mhm.
think also just kind of you know, spreading awareness about infertility, or you know, some people's child is not by choice, not through infertility, you know, circumstance, like you were saying before. And it's not always about you having to have a reason, you know, in order for someone to accept the fate that you or the path that you've been given.
Yeah.
So
It's an
I think
interesting
these
aspect.
things can be difficult. Sorry, Jay.
That's an interesting thing you said about which you just said, because often the excuses I find are made by parents to justify it to other people, because again, it's this whole thing about keeping up with everybody and delivering the timeline. Oh, my son went to university, got a house, got a great job, drives this fantastic car, and very suitable for marriage. And the same thing for girls as well. So I think once marriage happens, they have to climb the next rung of the ladder. And the way they do that is with grandchildren. And
Mhm.
obviously, I understand there's a pressure for them as well.
Mhm.
But obviously, it's not something which is within their control
Yes.
because it's to do with the two people who are married, the children.
Mhm.
And if they're not able to have children, then it like you said, it might be medical, it might be circumstance, it might be something else, but it's not something that they can force. It's obviously
Yeah.
something that they want to deliver to the wider community.
Mhm.
I know my parents were like that anyways because um, I've liked rock music since I was 16 years old, and that was back in like the late 80s, early 90s.
Mhm.
back then it was not the done thing as an Indian person. It just wasn't.
Yeah, of
You
course
know,
not.
it's more accepted now, but you know, it lowered my kind of like my status in in that Indian society, and each of these layers actually just add to the pressure which I guess certain cultures bring to the table in terms of, you know, how you should be, how you should look, how you should cut your hair, what job you should have, where you should live, how you should look after your parents, which weddings you should go to, etc., etc. It's there's a lot of pressure. It doesn't allow for people to just say, you know what, I'm going to go off and do my own thing. And sometimes, you know, that's what they want to do, and maybe that's what's best for them. But they sometimes don't do it. They don't pursue that.
And I think, you know, these layers that you're talking about, I can relate to that. Excuse me, because of a lot of things. You know, my parents are in a dual heritage marriage. That wasn't very common back then. You know, me and my sister look different to everybody in our community. So that was another thing. And then on top of that, I had a chronic illness in my 20s that no one seemed to have. Then I was infertile. So all these layers, and then obviously childless not by choice, because a lot of people go on to have children through IVF. And I didn't, you know, I miscarried 4 times. So I think all these layers play a big part. And just going back to religion, there's something in my faith where women do have a high status, but there's like the high status is when they say like basically, you know, a woman completes half her husband's religion when they get married. The status, you know, of parents in paradise if they have good pious daughters. And then the other one is like the mother is at like the top of the scale because, you know, all the difficulties she's had rearing a child and, you know, giving birth. And while that's lovely, and of course that's nice to hear if you're a mother, if you're partnered, or, you know, if you have daughters. But I think the emphasis, especially on from our, you know, religious imams, can a lot of the time be on how, you know, much reward these people gain. But there's also a big thing in our faith about patience. You know, having patience is the hardest test, harder than all of these things that I just mentioned. And sometimes the focus isn't on that, the rewards for patience when you don't get something. It's always on if you're a mother, if you're a wife, if you're a pious daughter. And I think that there needs to be some balance, because what if you're a person who never has any of these things? How are you going to feel if their moms or people in our faith are only talking about the other side? And I think that also needs to be discussed and changed. And recently my brother-in-law, he's an imam, and somebody he knew at the mosque did a talk about childlessness, which you very rarely hear. Yeah, and the start was good, and he said to me, listen to it and give me feedback. And then it kind of went a bit downhill, because some of the things were like, you know, you have to expect people to ask you when you're having a baby, you just have to toughen up. And I was like, no, we don't have to toughen up at all. The method should be, firstly, don't ask people personal questions because it's none of your business. And even in our faith, they say, don't ask things that don't concern you. It's a big thing in our faith. Don't ask people because it carries a lot of emotional weight. Marriage, job, you know, having kids, not having kids. And so my feedback was, look, it started off good, but it kind of went downhill. And I was like, no, we need to have, you know, more open discussions with people who were childless, because this man had 5 kids. And I was like, I'm happy that he started to talk about it, but you have to talk about it from the perspective of those that you're giving advice on, because as much as you think you're helping, you're not. And at the end of the talk, he said, you can just adopt. And I was like, what? I was like, this is not helping. This is actually making things worse, because you're saying to someone they only have value if you have a child at the end of it, whatever way, you can always adopt. And it's like, well, actually, if I'm childless not by choice and I'm saying I'm okay with it, I don't need to find an alternate path to parenthood. Good if you want to, but you're telling everyone that this is what you should do. And why don't you adopt? You've got 5 kids. Why don't you have 3 and adopt 2?
And then they'll see how hard adoption actually is when you get into the
Exactly.
system, because it's not a walk in the park, as Bindi and I experienced. You know, it was we were obviously down here in Sussex, and we've often discussed whether it would be different in London, but I've read stories of people in London who've actually had bad experiences with the adoption process. It's extremely judgmental. It's extremely um, invasive. It's not a guaranteed process at the end of it. And yeah, it's tough. Adoption process was tough, to go through for sure.
And also going through, I think, as well in
Sorry, I froze there.
oh, I think also going through it in a country which might not understand different cultures and faiths and all of that kind of aspect, and then going into that, is really, really, yeah, really, really difficult. But I completely agree with you, Aisha, when you say, people shouldn't ask things. And I remember when before I was married and when I was much younger, one of my cousins' wives kept, asking me, well, when are you going to meet someone? What about this person? When are you going to meet someone? And she said, oh, I'm only saying it to you because I had it all, people said it to me, so I'm going to say it to you now. And I know she's got a daughter, and I would never think of saying it to that daughter at all. And I think, why do some people have to do things or to say things just maybe because it's passed down or the same thing was said to them, so they want to say it to other people, and it's the same kind of rules or guides and on all of that, and it's like, no, we want to break that cycle, we want to break that trauma.
Yeah. And I think as well, like culturally, when you see a lot of people online with these Instagram accounts talking about fertility or childlessness, a lot of the time, Muslims particularly, they will have accounts but they won't show their face. Because I have so many Muslim women DMing me saying it's really nice because we see you on your platform, and it's nice to see someone who's visibly Muslim talking about it. And I think there is this big sense of stigma and shame.
Definitely.
So they'll talk about things, but very privately, and which is fine. But I just noticed that within my faith, there's not a lot of people who are willing to put their face to their Instagram account. And the reason why I did was because I was like, I have nothing to be ashamed of. I've got nothing to be ashamed of. I'm childless not by choice. So I went through this journey, and I want to be out there to show people that it's okay to talk about your story if you want to.
Yeah, and it helps others. Yeah, it helps others to see you as well, Aisha, so that, you can see that there are different. I know I found that within the childless not by choice community. So when people come to me and say, oh, you are a woman of color, or, you're not the usual face that I see, I think it's important that people do see different aspects, and because childlessness can affect anyone, and it does affect anyone. So yeah.
And I think, what, I just saw something pop up here, and someone was saying that they're from a Catholic background and they can resonate with what we're saying, but obviously being Catholic. So I think, even though our stories are layered, like you were saying in your previous talk about, writing to people of colour, there are things that are layered for certain individuals, like you were saying, single and childless, or, being gay and childless, and like childless person of colour. There are a lot of layers of extra burden depending on your family, your circumstance, what you choose to fit into. So it is very difficult. And I found that being half Indian, it did make a difference. Like I said, because of the wider community, and family is the center of everything.
Yeah.
So let me ask Jay a question. Because it's really nice to have a man of color. Honestly, it's just so refreshing to have a man's perspective as well, because a lot of the time there's a lot of women, especially when we're doing webinars. So this is a great treat and honor. So as a man of color, what's particularly hard about being childless?
Well, I've not found it particularly difficult being childless as a man of color.
Yeah.
And I'll expand on that in a second. But as a childless person, yes, of course, it's something which, it's something I think about sometimes, and realizations come when we're at family gatherings and things like that. So as a man, coming to realization that we won't see our children's birthdays or graduations or growing up or going to university, passing on knowledge and things like that. Certainly, that does affect me. Personally, it doesn't affect me as a man of color because like I explained, I've lived on the periphery for most of my life. So I've dealt with so much of that during my lifetime since I was 16. You know, growing up in an Indian community which didn't really embrace the fact that I was into a different. It was just music. It was a different style of music. It was my passion. It's become my work, my vocation. This is what I do, and I still feel like I'm a kid in a candy store, every day when I come to work in here. So it was definitely the right choice for me, but boy, was it tough, going through all of that. So I think what has happened over time is the challenges which I faced just built up a resilience. And
Yeah.
it's not something that I really realized until I wrote my piece for World Childless Week. And I was thinking about the questions for today as well, and just talking about my story. And I thought, wow, I didn't even realize I'd built up this resilience to actually say, okay, something hasn't happened. What are the next steps? How do I actually move forward with life? Because that's essentially what I had to do. At some point, I walked away from the Indian community because it didn't really embrace what I did or who I was. So it was like, okay, make it on my own. I'll just go and do something different. I'll go and find a community elsewhere. I'll find a partner in another way, because I wasn't meeting somebody within the community, etc., etc. For these reasons. So I don't think it's affected me being South Asian and childless. Will it at some point? Maybe. Maybe I'll come across a situation, like you said. I'll be sitting with an elder, and they'll be like,
Mm.
"What about your children?" And you'll
Yeah,
be
where
like,
are they?
Where,
"Okay,
yeah, where are
awkward,
your children?
awkward moment." um, so
It's
yeah,
funny that
but
you say that because we're talking about you're saying that resilience. Sorry, my thing's gone unstable. Can you hear me?
Yes,
yes, we
we can hear you.
Well, you're talking about resilience, and do you feel like because of what happened and because of the music that you were into, that it kind of helped prepare for this then?
a little bit, yes,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. I didn't quite understand why I was able to be strong when, we got to the end of that journey, and it was the the last part of the journey was really the adoption process. And when that failed, we had a choice. We could either go through three more months worth of like interviews and invasion and stuff. And, you know, um, I just remember talking to Bindi about it and reading the report that they'd done. And I didn't recognize the people that they'd written about. It was like, these people don't get us. They
Yeah.
these are not the people that we are.
Yeah.
So even if we do 3 more months, what are we going to do? Just change who we are?
Yeah.
So I think at that point, that resilience did kick in, and I was able to kind of be a little bit stronger. And in a way, I'm glad I was able to do that, because then I was able to be there for Bindi, because the grief was real. It was intense. It went on for years. It wasn't just something which went on for a few months and then, yeah, let's get on with life. I completely understand that people go through this for years and years and years and years. But if life has taught me anything, going through all of these challenges, it's that once you face the challenge, you have a choice to make. You can
Yeah.
either stay within that challenge and let it rule you, or you can choose to move forward. And I know in the past, I have mentally, I've kind of been still in that challenge, still being the victim until pretty recently, actually. Um, but I've always managed to move forward. And I think that was just that automatic thing which happened within kind of just my psyche, my life in my mind. It just kept saying, okay, regardless of this, we still got to do something. We still got to kind of, carry on, and then it works it out. Now I'm just, more comfortable with who I am and where I am in life and what I do, and you know, just a lot more confident in where I am. And I think it helps. It certainly does help me. I hopefully, hoping it helps Bindi as well through kind of me being strong for us, and trying to figure out a way that our life's gonna play out now, as childless people.
Yeah, it's interesting because for me, with the layers that I've had, obviously my parents being in a dual heritage marriage, and then the layers I was talking about, I feel like because I have been othered quite a lot, I felt like it did really help in the
Yeah.
child's not by choice, because it was just like, oh yeah, stick on another layer.
Another thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
I talk about that a lot. I think that as people of color, we have definitely built up the resilience, but also we have been othered. We have been, there's been different parts of discrimination along the way. So it is, in a way, it is like another thing. I mean, it's deeply felt, of course, and it really goes deep, but it is another thing that we are dealing with, and we have dealt with a lot already. So we have built up that resilience along the way and that inner strength to deal with things. Whether we've wanted to or not, that doesn't matter. It's happened because of the way things are. Yeah.
No, exactly. And so the last point, I think the next 10 minutes, and then the last 5 minutes, we can try and answer some questions or look at the comments. Sometimes there are stereotypes to, obviously, our cultures, and, sometimes, like you said, Jay, it wasn't more about being a man of color. It was childlessness was a separate issue. So it was actually good hearing it from that perspective. So what stereotypes have you not experienced that other people think are common?
Great
I'm happy
question.
to go.
Yeah, you go first, Aisha.
Go ahead.
So for me, I think a lot of the time, especially from non-Asians, so, some of my white friends or white colleagues, they'll be like, oh, how are your in-laws? And my in-laws were lovely. Like my mother-in-law was one of the first people who told me it's okay to stop. And at that time, I was so annoyed because the narrative back then was very much about don't give up, wasn't it? So I was like, how can she tell me to stop when she's got 3 sons, she's got 5 grandchildren? But like someone needed to say it, and she was like, you're enough. And looking back, I was like, wow, that was such a good thing to hear, even though I wasn't in the right mindset. My husband told me to stop years before we stopped. And then my mum, she told me as well, she was like, look, why does a child have to be the be all and end all? But sometimes you hear it from parents, it doesn't really go down very well, does it? Because you're like, well, you're telling me to stop, but you have what I want. But sometimes you need someone to tell you that it's okay to stop, like you're enough. So I think that was one of the stereotypes. And another one was, people assuming that I won't share my story because I'm Muslim and South Asian.
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes I get that where, they don't know whether to ask because, sometimes for my community, people can be quite closed about things, so that's another thing. And I think another stereotype is, sometimes you're left to it, but I've got such a big family that when I was going through fertility, the people that I did tell, like my sister-in-laws, my cousins, we've got like, there's loads of us, I've got over 30 first cousins. My cousins were really there for me. Like they would send food, they would come and sit with me at stupid hours in the ache. My sister-in-laws would come over, my sister. And that community that we have, like, in a way it can be hard because of, the triggers and the stereotypes. And then the other side, it's lovely to have a community that you don't have to worry about anything when you're going through something. And that, there are some traditions and customs of mine that I love. And, I wouldn't want it any other way because it's so helpful and it is so powerful. So these are some of the stereotypes that I feel people don't, might not understand or have a one-sided view on. But these things really help me.
Yeah, I mean, I feel Yeah, I mean, I think I would love that. I feel with my family having that community is it's more like it's just there in name rather than actual. So I really, I love that for you. I mean, that I think is really, really special, really special.
There for me now, even now as as a childless
Yeah,
person, my
yeah.
cousins, my friends, my sister-in-laws, my sister, I've still got that network. Just because I've stopped trying for a baby, they're still checking about my childlessness. They don't have to do that. It's been 4 years. And I can still talk open, like how they will talk about their kids if we have like a setting. I will come
Yeah.
up and say something about something that happened, and it's just like a normal part of our conversation. They don't try and shush me or shut me up. And I'm not a dweller, so I don't sit there like talking about it for hours, but sometimes something might come up and I might need to say something. So I think because I can be so open with my in-laws, my parents, and my dad, he came with me to loads of my fertility appointments with my specialist. Even when we went to India, speaking of like, them like medicine gurus, we did go to see one. And my aunt, who's my dad's sister, was like, I'll come with you. And I was like, no, it's fine. I was like, I talk about everything to my dad. We talk about periods, we talk about fertility. It's all very open. There's nothing, I don't need to be embarrassed in front of my dad. And him coming to me with my appointments meant a lot to me. And sometimes I feel like I carried on a lot longer for the sake of my dad. Not that he pressured me into it,
Yeah.
because he wanted it so much for me. When someone wants it, not for them to be a grandfather, he wanted it so much for me. And sometimes I feel like that's quite difficult, because he would have loved for me to have what other people have had for me.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah, or to be, I feel that a stereotype is that, so neither of our parents are grandparents, and I feel that again, so it's like, not having them have what they would have possibly wanted, or would have wanted, definitely. And also that kind of stereotype of having, yeah, that they are grandparents when they're not, and also we don't have any nieces and nephews either. So it's like there isn't that. I guess then, in a way, the extended family that I talk about is more the uncles and aunts and the cousins rather than the extended of siblings or anything like that. So it's yeah, so I think that's a kind of a stereotype that there would be other people around, or they would be, and yeah, that there aren't. And I suppose that shows how different everyone is, right? Yes, we're all Indian heritage here, but we're all different. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's really interesting. Jay?
I guess from my perspective, it's that stereotype that being from a large or hailing from a large Indian family, that um, everyone just lives out of everyone else's pockets. They see each other every weekend and hang out with each other. They do events with each other, go to each other's weddings, etc., etc. You go and see your uncles, aunts, cousins, etc. I've always been a bit of a loner, if I'm honest about it. So I kind of stopped doing that a long, long time ago. So I guess some people probably, do have that stereotype image of the Indian family unit, and how it is to live within that. And I know a lot of people are happy with that, and that's totally, totally cool. I've just been different, so I have not experienced that. I experienced it obviously when I was a child, because used to be around at my grandparents every holiday, and my uncles and aunts and cousins and everyone was always there. It used to be just a lot of people. But as I grew older, just I changed as a person and became who I was. So that stereotype no longer applies in my life. And we obviously live down in Brighton, and our parents are in London, and most of the family is in London. A lot of them I know from my family, a lot of them are in West London, so they're concentrated within that area, and they still see each other. They still kind of hang out with each other, and go to the weddings, etc., etc. But yeah, I don't have to. Well, I don't live that stereotype for sure.
Yeah, and that's interesting, isn't it, for people that are listening? Because sometimes, like I spoke about, there are stereotypes of South Asians, and just listening to us here, we've all got a very varied
Right.
home life, and what we see is important, and our traditions and values and cultures. even though we're South Asian, similar but different in a lot of ways. Shall we have a look at some of the chat?
Yeah. There's a question as well in the Q&A part.
Can you see it? If you can,
I
if you can see it,
can
read it.
see it. I can. Yes, I will read it. So someone is saying, I put all my efforts into having kids and dated people my whole life, but I ruined my opportunity with my destiny. I think God doesn't give you a chance to have kids if you ruin the divine chances. Every day I feel guilty for not achieving my goal of having kids. What do you think, please? I think, Aisha, you answered a lot of that earlier on. Do you remember when you were talking about people minding their business and all of, yeah. Do you want to answer that?
I mean, look, the thing is, it's such a difficult question to answer because, you know, my personal belief is that it's really quite difficult to answer because
Yeah.
it depends on the perspective you have, isn't it? And everyone's spirituality beliefs are very different. I mean, in my faith, we believe that certain things are written for you or not written for you. So it's not about fault, it's not about blame. It's just sometimes some people have different challenges to other people. So this is my hard. Someone else's hard might be that their parent dies early. Someone else's hard might be that they can never afford to buy a house.
Right.
Nothing is linear, but everybody will have something, whatever problem it is, that they'll be able to manage. That's like in my faith. So it's very difficult to answer that question from another perspective. But I
Yeah.
also say, religion aside, and I'm not sure the circumstances if it's to do with infertility, but it's nothing that you did or didn't do. You know, and I think sometimes we all as humans look for something to blame. And if we don't have a reason for something, that can be very difficult. So I think sometimes we self-sabotage. I did it a lot. Why didn't I realize I had endometriosis? Why didn't they give me a laparoscopy sooner? Maybe I could have. That took me years to kind of get rid of that because that shame and blame, where does it come from? It comes from somewhere. Societal expectations, culture, sometimes parents, sometimes family, and that's layered. So I think the self-sabotage and the blaming isn't going to help. Like you know, if it happens that you can't have a child, you want to live the best, happiest life that you can live without a child. And these layers of self-sabotage are very difficult to get rid of. So for me, therapy really helped me with that. And I think that's another thing in our community that we don't do enough of or encourage therapy. It literally was a game changer for me. Therapy, coaching, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. I wouldn't be living a happy life without children. And not to say, like I said, at some points there are, you know, certain things I feel, but not like it was. And, you know, it doesn't affect my daily life not having kids where it used to about 6-7 years ago. So I don't know if that's answered the question.
Yeah, I was thinking kind of also around like what we were saying about sometimes with religions or with faith, and it's about the karma or what you've done previously. And sometimes it can be that it doesn't happen, you know, that it's not, it just doesn't happen or and yeah, so what I would say to this person is, you know, be gentle with yourself. Don't blame, don't shame yourself, don't feel guilty about it. And yes, definitely agree with you about therapy, you know, coaching, things that are going to help you.
And I think also to remember, this is a thing that I always, you know, remember, shitty people have kids. People who don't deserve kids have many children. So where's their karma then? Do you see what I mean? It's like,
yeah,
you know, sometimes that we need to look at it from that perspective. So, you know, none of us here are shitty people. So excuse my language. So for me, it's just, you know, I have 2 medical conditions that prevented me from having children. And that's enough for me. You know, I don't need to rationalize it, reason with it. It's nothing to do with God punishing me, you know, it's to do with the fact that I've got 2 medical conditions. And I feel like if I had any other medical condition that caused something else, I would have a lot more compassion with myself, or would have years ago. And people would have had a lot more compassion with me. So, you know, these things happen and sometimes there aren't reasons.
And expanding on what you just said, Aisha, you know, some very, very good people who have a massive impact on life are remain childless. You know, my uncle, he was my lifelong hero. He passed away when he was 26 and I was like 15 or 16 years old. but I know
Yeah.
the impact he had on my life and the life of the people he came into contact with within that short time was just, it was immense. You know, we still remember him with so much joy and so much inspiration. Benjamin Zephaniah, who passed away earlier in the year, and so, you know, how much of an impact did he have?
I love
We
him.
can still have a very, very fulfilling existence, even though we don't have kids, and we can leave something behind. But I guess part of it is what you and Bindi just said. You go through the acceptance. You get to a point where you understand that you're not at fault for the circumstances you're in, but then that then poses a question: what are you going to do from that point? Are you going to just stay there, or are you going to choose then to do something which is going to leave your footprints in the sand?
Yeah, that's right. Are there any more questions, Bindi?
There's no more
You saw?
questions. Not in the
There's some
Q&A.
comments.
I didn't
Doing what you
yeah,
like.
there's
Sorry,
comments.
go on.
Yeah, there's comments in the chat, but not. I don't think there's any questions though in the chat.
Doing what you love is you release what you didn't serve you. You found a loving community.
Yeah, and
Someone's asking, they missed most of the web.
yeah.
Sorry,
I
you know
was
what? I
going
think my
to
internet's
say,
gone unstable.
yeah, I
I'm
was
so
going to say the
sorry.
same. It is
Can you hear me?
recorded. It is recorded, so you'll get that. Yeah, we can hear
There's
you
another
actually. Yeah.
comment here. I'm so glad you're talking about it as a Muslim. Beautiful. Yes, it makes a difference as a person of color. I'm just seeing if there's anything else. Yes, all the layers, childless grief, and all that comes with it was just a new armor I had to build up.
Definitely.
So thank you so much, everyone, for commenting and tuning in to
There is
this
a question.
webinar.
There is a question. I don't know if we've got time. Can we talk about pressure felt being an aunt, uncle to kids that don't even live close by? In our community, an aunt is really an extended mother, and it's hard for me to navigate. Yeah.
I don't know if we've got time because it's
Yeah, it's quite a long, that's
so
quite a
sorry.
long, in-depth.
So sorry. Okay, so it's 2 o'clock, so we're going to have to wrap this up. Thank you everybody for tuning in, leaving comments, listening to us. And we hope what we said resonated with you and did trigger anyone, because that wasn't the point of this webinar. We were just talking about it from our perspective. So this isn't, we're not doctors or anything like that. This is just from our perspective and just how we felt. So, but that's why we wanted to come together to talk about it from 3 different perspectives. And if you had to say one thing that you want people to take away in one sentence, what would it be, Bindi? Before we go.
Yeah, I would say be yourself no matter what. So yes, if you're a person of color, if you're not, be yourself as much as you can. And yeah, ease through all of the grief that you're feeling, and yeah, you'll get there.
Jay?
Small steps to get to the other side, and then when you're on the other side, just breathe the air, decide what you want to do, and decide to do, well, I always decide to do something which is positive. I like to inspire people, so hopefully that will give other people a little bit of inspiration to do the same.
Thank you, Jay. And I would say, if you're still struggling and it's been a while, get support. Support's really important. Talk about your feelings, because you've got nothing to be ashamed of. And 3, you can have a happy life without children. And it's okay if sometimes there's things that upset you. That's actually normal. It doesn't go away, but you can learn to live with not having children. Anyway, so we just want to say goodbye because we have to wrap up. Thank you for joining me, Jay and Bindi.
Thank you for having us.
And thank you, Steph.